Well, welcome to today's pipeline. We have entered a new world after the decisions made by President Trump and the U.S. military and Israel to bomb Iran. We're going to talk about what that means now and the effects and the fallout from it, and some recent updates that have just happened within the last hour. So be sure to stay tuned with us here on the Pipeline Report as we dive into the news and how we can pray through this as intercessors and watchmen on the wall. All right, everyone. Thank you guys for joining in with us today. It's Zach flying solo today. Um, Yay! I got some new gear here to play with as Eric's been, he's on his way to Ireland, or should be in Ireland now. But we have a lot to get to today. So I'm gonna let everybody join in here for a second. Let me guys know where you're joining in from, as Pastor Tim and the team, a huge team from Christian Center and a few from around the world, have gone to Ireland to do a Thin Places tour with Rose and Kevin Sambrook, which is very interesting at this time in world history, as we've now entered a new world. And we want to talk about that today, talk about the effects and the fallouts of this decision and what this really means. So if you guys have been buried under a rock, which I know most of you have not been, you have seen the decisions that have been made by President Trump to bomb Iran and Israel as well to join in. And as of last night, I haven't heard or seen any updated numbers. Obviously, the Iranian Supreme Leader, Khomeini, has been eliminated, or as President Trump would like to say, terminated, along with 47 other top members of the Iranian dictatorship and the IRGC. President Trump and the Israelis looks like they have highlighted who they want to go after and who they want to take out. And it's not only the political leaders, but also the military leaders within the IRGC. Reports of them also taking out their Navy, which was the last hindrance there. And this is on the heels of last June, when we saw President Trump in the middle of the night, along with Israel, go in for starting in one night with the B-2 bombers and dropping in and taking out nuclear facilities in major areas that were puzzling, to say the least, from the Iran nuclear deal from Obama, and that they took those out. And what President Trump said, and we'll get into that here in a second, is, look, he gave them every opportunity to come to the negotiating table and make a deal. And one of the big things that happened over the last week, which was obviously we talked about it here, the buildup of military assets of the United States surrounding Iran because of the potential threat. And what was kind of the final ultimatum that was put down was about, it was like 96 hours before the actual attack went through. President Trump put an ultimatum down and said, look, you either internally deal with these and destroy the nuclear sites that you have and have been building up, or we're going to go take them out. And if you heard Marco Rubio say something, he pointed out to the fact that, look, and even Pete Hegseth and JD Vance, everybody's come out and said this and said, look, if you're going to build these nuclear facilities, why are you the only country in the world who has these that are building them within mountains? If you were being a good faith negotiator in developing these nuclear facilities and needing these nuclear sites and capacitors to be able to make quote unquote medical equipment and civilian equipment and things of that nature, why are you doing it inside of a rocky mountain? I think we understand why, of the bad faith negotiators that he was dealing with. And so President Trump finally said enough. So the question is, what does this mean moving forward? What is the fallout of this politically? And so we have a lot to deal with and go through here. So I want to bring up this clip from Nancy Pelosi when Obama was in office, when she was asked about this very specific question, when Obama was going through and bombing um, major sites in the Middle East. Because if you don't remember, Obama did a lot of this stuff when he was president. And so I'm going to blow this up and we're going to play this. Let me know if you can hear this as I bring this up because I'm setting up new equipment here.
So, Madam Speaker, or Madam Leader, you're saying that the president did not need authorization initially and still does not need any authorization from Congress on Libya?
Yes.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you all very much.
So this is obviously going back to when President Obama was bombing Libya. And did he need the powers and go through Congress to have 300 plus 50 members of Congress advise him and agree to doing this? Because this is a big question is, does the president have the authority to unilaterally make this decision? Now, what their Democrats are trying to do now is pull back the power of the president. But this gets back to what is written in the founding documents about the president. And this will be a major thing for future presidents to understand of how far reaching your powers can be and understanding the legalities of things there for the president. And we're going to continue diving into that. We've done that before of reading through this, but this was moments ago, about an hour or so ago. Pete Hegseth came out in a press briefing at the Pentagon, and this was his opening remarks. And I want to play this because he goes off and kind of summarizes some things. But I want to play some things that President Trump said because this is obviously militarily something we're going to watch out for and pray for. But we want to look at this as from the perspective of the Iranian people, the Persian people there, and what their thought process is and needs to be through this. But here's Pete Hegseth first about giving us an update from what has happened over the last several hours from the troops there in the region. And I think this is major and key for us to understand where things are at as we speak.
Well, good morning. We just finished an update with Admiral Brad Cooper, the CENTCOM commander, across the CENTCOM AOR, our leadership and troops, as you would expect, doing a fantastic job. 2 days ago, under the direction and direct orders of President Donald J. Trump, the Department of War launched Operation Epic Fury, the most lethal, most complex, and most precise aerial operation in history. For 47 long years, the expansionist and Islamist regime in Tehran has waged a savage, one-sided war against America. They didn't always declare it openly, except for their constant chants of death to America. They did it through the blood of our people. Car bombs in Beirut.
And this is a key point Trump has made this weekend. He's like, look, okay, there's the nuclear sites, there's the nuclear facilities, but whenever you see Iraq, Afghanistan, all these regions where we've gone to battle and gone to war, we've seen the fact that it has been Iranian proxies who have been the ones to push the weapons, push the strategies that have been there. And if you look at last week, Ukraine took out some ballistic missiles that Russia had, a ballistic missile facility that was major and key. But then also, this is what the United States and Israel are going after. They're saying, look, if they have these capabilities of being able to hit, it's not just Israel, it's being able to hit Europe. And if they can successfully hit Europe from Iran, then they can definitely hit United States from Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, if they ever so have the capabilities of building up the military capabilities there. And so this is a bigger thing to kind of go in and squash. And so we're seeing this play out. And I think that's a huge thing of pinpointing. And Hegseth goes on, I'll let him talk a little bit more. He goes on to talk about, look, he says, I've seen both realms of this warfare because he was an active duty military member during these battles. And so he knows exactly what he's dealing with here, but I'll let him continue.
Rocket attacks on our ships, murders at our embassies, roadside bombs in Iraq and Afghanistan, funded and armed by Iranian Quds Force and IRGC killers. My generation of veterans carry the names of brothers who never came home. Brothers butchered by Iranian-backed roadside bombs and well-armed militias, thousands of our own. We didn't start this war. but under President Trump, we are finishing it. Their war on Americans has become our retribution against their Ayatollah and his death cult. It took the 47th president, a fighter who always puts America first, to finally draw the line after 47 years of Iranian belligerence.
And I think that's very, very key there to look, Obama had the opportunity, Biden had the opportunity, and what did they do? Rather than putting sanctions and doing things that Trump was doing, they gave him cash, upwards of billions and billions of dollars, and Trump finally said enough. Obviously, his first term, he put sanctions that hurt the people, hurt the economy, but ultimately the people understood in the land, they did it. And you're seeing all the dances and memes and everything going on. Everybody's being upset. But the Iranian people are doing the Trump dance. They're dancing for this because they understand what this means. And this was the key thing. And this is why we titled this today. Trump gives a declarative statement to the Iranian people. And I think it's something that I think we need to pray for them in this moment. If you didn't hear it, here it is, of telling them this is your moment.
The great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered. Don't leave your home. It's very dangerous outside. Bombs will be dropping everywhere. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations. Now you have a president who is giving you what you want. So let's see how you respond. America is backing you with overwhelming strength and devastating force. Now is the time to seize control of your destiny and to unleash the prosperous and glorious future that is close within your reach. This is the moment for action. Do not let it pass.
So President Trump here is giving the Iranian people the opening here that they need to be able to take back their country. Now, the question is, how do they then form a government? Because, okay, so you take out the top leaders, you take out the people. The people there in the land are very familiar with the voting process, as the government now in current place has gone through the motions of developing a quote-unquote democratic process. But in reality, it was a totalitarian process and a communist process to where they knew the outcome before it was even begun. But the people have started to begin, especially the younger crowds, have really started to see where the possibility of them being able to be involved in that decision. And so now they're kind of itching at that. And I heard a good report from somebody who is very involved in understanding of this situation in the Middle East, especially with Iran. They talked about the fact that, look, the current 30 and unders, Gen Zs, millennials, they want to right the wrong that was done by the previous generation in 79 and before that, because it came about the same way, where they had riots on the streets. The young people were kind of in an uproar. They didn't like the way that the supreme leader was taking the country. There were some problems there. Obviously, the U.S. was involved in that, but now they're like, okay, the kids are like, hey, we don't want to go down this road, so they're trying to come back. And the issue is this: okay, how do they come back? Do they come back as a democracy? Do they come back as a continued theocracy, but kind of pull back the Sharia law that's there? Do they again go to a monarchy? Do they then go to a constitutional monarchy? Like, how do they come about this? How do they form their government? Because right now, and this is what the U.S. is following, is there are things that are laid out within the current Iranian constitution, which allows for a theocracy and a supreme rule, is who's going to be the next leader. There's rumors last night that they took out the new number one in command. There's a possibility that they may make the son of the former supreme leader the current leader. But then there's also the crown prince, who's here, it's believed to be in America, somewhere in the region, trying to advise and get more involved. I've seen things from people like Patrick Bet-David, if you know him from Valuetainment, say, because he's Iranian, say, look, you need to step up. The crown prince needs to step up and get involved in this. And so where things lie, this is the huge question. But the reality of why the United States did this was because of the buildup for ballistic weapons. And I want to play this video. I'm trying to find it here. So we've seen, okay, U.S. has attacked Israel has attacked, of going after certain sites, certain regions. And I think we're still, I mean, this is coming fast blitz. I mean, they're nonstop. They're doing it in broad daylight. They're doing it at night. But then here we have, I'm going to share this, is Benny Johnson put this out. This was in Israel. This is key for Israel, is they started using their iron beam, their laser beam in Israel to start shooting down some rockets. And if you can see it here, I'll blow it up. Is there's no sound to it, but if you see it, they're shooting it off right there real quick, taking out some rockets there that have been in effect. This is a major breakthrough, and you can see how far they're getting right there to the ground. This is a major breakthrough for Israel and even for the United States, as we have the possibility of being able to use this if we were in a similar situation. So the effects of this are very, very key here for not only Israel, but the United States in what the possibility of warfare looks like moving forward. Obviously, yesterday, I want to highlight this, got to talk about this. In Austin, there was a naturalized citizen from Senegal who did basically, it was a terrorist attack in a nightclub in Austin, I believe, taking out 3 and then ruining, I believe, up to 10 to 17 more people before the cops took him out, believing that, hey, this is a retaliation against it. There was a report that obviously his hoodie said property of Allah, but then under his shirt, he had some form of Iranian shirt printing on his shirt. And so this is a fallout from this. Now, domestically is, okay, where are these sleeper cells? Where are these things happening? Can the DOJ, can the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, do they know where these people at? The millions of people that President Biden let in. And I know I'm kind of coming at you guys fast here, but these are now all the questions that come to rise. You got the foreign relations that are happening, but then you also have the things here back home that President Trump's having to go after. And what you're seeing, and I really want to get to this point, is what you're seeing a major split. You have the left, who's condemning Trump for pretty much everything, saying Americans are going to lose their lives. How dare he do this? This means troops on the ground, etc. You have those on the far right who are saying you can never have troops on the ground, and I don't necessarily disagree with them. And I think military veterans and families would agree with him as well. And then you have the center road, where you would put Trump and Speaker Johnson, Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, who were saying, look, this was a necessary decision that needed to be done. That if you look at this, the capabilities of what they were trying to do, there was one video where one of the ballistic missiles hit in Tel Aviv. They're kind of keeping it mum as to where it hit, but the reality is it hit in an area where it caused some major damage, and that was just one of the missiles that they shot out that actually did some damage there. And the question is if they had 8,000 more of those, what would they have done with those? Ben Shapiro did a good analysis of walking through the satellite images of what happened recently after June when Trump bombed, and then showing what had happened recently since then, and how the Iranians were building back better in their eyes what had actually happened. And so there's one clip I do want to play from him in looking at this from a different perspective, which is that the Chinese and the Russians are not so happy about this and what this means moving forward. So let me pull this up here, and I want to play this one.
You want to know how things are lining up? The people who are protesting and the people who are happy today internationally. Who's happy? Iranians and Persians globally, very, very happy. CCP, not so happy. The Chinese, not so happy. And now, there have been questions raised about the legality of this action. Let us be clear about military action. My favorite is when people start citing the war-making power of...
And so here you see this. I want to highlight this. This is going on everywhere. Iranians getting out on the streets. It happened in Times Square. Fox was reporting about that yesterday. It's happening in major cities around the world, where they're getting out and cheering this decision that is being made.
Congress, under the Constitution. Cool beans, guys. In the last actually declared war of the United States was, like full-scale declared war of the United States, it was World War II. That is not the way that war has been done in the United States for a very long time, because the opportunity is simply too quick. You got to move fast. And so there is something called the War Powers Resolution. It requires the executive branch to go justify its action before Congress within 60 days of military action beginning. If you think this operation is lasting 2 months, you're out of your mind.
And that's a key point there, is we have to recognize that, okay, President Trump put this in. He has 2 months to basically go tell Congress, this is why we did it. He's already done it. A lot of them have already, congressmen and women have come out on news stations and said, look, we're okay with it, because they've laid out privately. There's no real public declaration of what the objectives are, because they want to keep those private. And obviously they're trying to test and see who can be trustworthy, depending on certain the committees that they're on. But what they're doing is they're saying, okay, here's our objectives. Here's what we want to do. None of them include troops on the ground. Obviously, there's been reports, quote unquote, that President Trump has not taken troops off the table. But I think he knows, coming up to the midterms, coming up to some elections here rather soon, that might be a bad idea. And I don't think right now he's looking politically. He's saying, look, this is a decision that needs to be made, and one that can be very beneficial for the American people to look at. And here's the video of what I was talking about. I want to play this, of the different satellite images that they showed, where we see what is really happening within Iran. And this is key, because if you understand, as we've been negotiating, oh, Iran's coming to the table, they want peace. You hear people, oh, they're not really this evil. How do you know that they're really building nuclear weapons? Israel's been saying this for centuries. You know, there's been jokes online about this. This is the reality. Here it is. This is actual footage here that Ben plays out.
Because it turns out that President Trump was right. America's Midnight Hammer operation did do significant and heavy damage to the Iranian nuclear facilities, but they immediately started rebuilding, hardening. They immediately started upping the ante. Here you can see the rebuilding of facilities. You can see the difference between the original picture and then the rebuilding of the buildings, right?
So if you see here on the left-hand side, there's the destruction of buildings and roadways and things of that nature. And then here on the right, if you can see it, if you can see my mouse cursor here, you see it being built up back right here. And so Trump said, look, okay, last year we took that out. Now you're building back. Why is that? And so they didn't necessarily negotiate that.
Buildings don't exist on the left side. They do exist on the right.
And here's another one where you can see some building. This one's harder to tell.
Side. Here you can see actual building activity happening on the ground, rebuilding of the building. Iran was moving toward a thing. So the question was, how imminent was it? I have a question. Why do you have to wait until the murderer is in your living room in order to stop him?
That's a good point he talked about. I don't want to discuss that and dive into that, but we see the realities of this is what was going on. And PTXF talked about it as like, look, they were delaying. They were coming to the table, but in reality, this is the thing that countries like this do. I've talked about it before, where whenever they're in places of strength, they attack. Whenever they're weak, they negotiate for peace. And the problem for America and Western civilizations is that they fall for it. They look at these and say, okay, they really want to come to the table. They want to try diplomacy. Trump tried that, but here's what he's also seeing. You know, Reagan talked about it, trust but verify. Okay, I'm going to trust you to a point to say, hey, you want to come to the table, you want to negotiate, you want to bring peace, but then let's also verify it. Let's not build back better. Let's put these nuclear facilities out in the open. And I think Trump called it out and said, enough is enough. Now, the backlash on Israel is they've been getting attacked. The backlash on U.S. forces in the region is there have been attacks on them. In Kuwait yesterday, there was a pilot who had to eject. Thankfully, he was rescued and no harm came to him, although the plane he was piloting did unfortunately no longer exists. It was eliminated. So there's backlash because Iran, since being hit, is basically just firing off. And the belief is that they're trying to fire off as many missiles and cause as much damage before they have to make a decision on their lives and their livelihood and their leadership within the country. And President Trump's put that out there. He said, look, you have a decision. He's offered him immunity. I don't know how wise that is, but I think he understands who he's dealing with here. Of they're not going to surrender, and I'm speaking specifically to the IRGC, the military leaders who are enforcing the laws and allowing this dictatorship to stay into place. And so, yeah, everybody's leaving these comments. You can't trust a snake, et cetera, stuff like that. I think this is key. This is huge. And so Trump's laying this out there. He's being very communicative to those who are involved in this. And here's a brief map. If you can see, it's kind of spread out all over the region. They're going after big military sites within Iran. I know this is kind of hard to see. Let me blow it up a little bit. There we go. That's better. Of the region where the United States has gone after, Iranians, they've even shot back at in Dubai, which in Saudi Arabia is one of their allies. Why is that? In other regions, and in Pakistan yesterday, I'm trying to remember everything. There's a lot that's been going on. In Pakistan yesterday, there was an uproar at an embassy to go after Americans there at the embassy in Pakistan, and the Marines came in and shut that down real quick. But as you see here, Israel and the United States are going after strategic targets to allow the people to rise up and take back their freedom. And I think that's the key thing we have to remember here is the fact that, look, this is an opportunity that the Iranian people have been crying for. Obviously, the people who are not in the land obviously want that, but they're not the ones living there. They're not the ones who have to deal with this and make a decision of, do they then go out and risk their lives? Because one thing we can't forget that I think this kind of gets brushed under the rug is that the Iranian leadership who has been there in place has been indiscriminately taking out protesters upwards to what's been believed, as far as the most accurate is confirmed, is 30,000. There's some reports that say upwards of 60,000. So we're seeing these numbers fall pretty significantly high. And President Trump's red line was, look, you take out one of them, we're going to come after you. So that was the red line. It looked like, hey, he was kind of backing down off of that. But he held strong and gave that red line a chance to be a warning. And the Iranian leadership didn't heed that advice. So we see this play out. We see Trump holding the line here, letting his yes be yes, not, letting his no be no. And here's some remarks that I do want to play. I'm just trying to paint a picture here before diving into some prayer points of what it is we need to be looking at and praying for in the season ahead. But here's Trump earlier this morning before an award ceremony talking about Operation Epic Fury.
So before we begin this important ceremony, and there's no ceremony that can be much more important than this, let me provide a brief update on Operation Epic Fury. Today, the United States military continues to carry out large-scale combat operations in Iran to eliminate the grave threats posed to America by this terrible terrorist regime. Following our obliteration of Iran's nuclear program in Operation Midnight Hammer a short while ago, we warned Iran not to make any attempt to rebuild at a different location because they were unable to use the ones that we so powerfully blew up. But they ignored those warnings and refused to cease their pursuit of nuclear weapons. In addition, the regime's conventional ballistic missile program was growing rapidly and dramatically, and this posed a very clear, colossal threat to America and our forces stationed overseas. The regime already had missiles capable of hitting Europe and our bases, both local and overseas, and would soon have had missiles capable of reaching our beautiful America. The purpose of this fast-growing missile program was to shield their nuclear weapon development and make it extraordinarily difficult for anyone to stop them from making these highly forbidden by us nuclear weapons. We were the ones that were complaining. We were the ones that wanted it stopped, but everybody was behind us. They just didn't have the courage to say so. An Iranian regime armed with long-range missiles and nuclear weapons would be an intolerable threat to the Middle East, but also to the American people. Our country itself would be under threat, and it was very nearly under threat.
So we hear President Trump saying this, and this is on the heels of his State of the Union address. And if you remember that, he came out on a long-winded speech and laid out the groundwork for a lot of things. But he did this move, which was epic. Some believe it's Stephen Miller, and I wouldn't put it past him for being the one to advise this. But he came out and said this, because if you hear about him, President Trump, you hear what he's saying there. He's saying, look, this is about the American people. Obviously, this helps the world here deal with a regime who was hell-bent on bloodshed and creating bloodshed. And he says enough is enough. And so we see this from the recent State of the Union. And we have to play this because this is a very powerful moment. And Mike Johnson, Speaker Johnson, right after, going on news networks and the day after, and since then, talked about this will be used in campaigns. Because this was a key moment where this let your leaders, your representatives, wherever you are at in this country, make a decision publicly, a very simple decision, on who they stand for and what agenda they are moving forward with.
So tonight I'm inviting every legislator to join with my administration in reaffirming a fundamental principle. If you agree with this statement, then stand up and show your support. The first duty of the American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens.
So clearly you can see pretty much majority of people get up and stand, Republicans especially, and those President Trump invited in, and special guests and everybody. But then you see some Democrats just sitting there as they're painting into the room there and not understanding the moment that they're in. I mean, when asked the simple question of who do they represent? Who should they stand for? Is it Americans or is it illegals? And I think he's somber there and lets the moment settle because it's one that needs to settle. This is significant. Our representatives are telling you who they are for. The laws that they're called to uphold. And they're choosing in the moment, and obviously before then. And he called them out on it. And it's the same sentiment here of the American people over the possibility of being threatened with Iran. And Ben Shapiro talked about it there. It's like, do you let a criminal who you know, if they had a weapon, came in your house and attacked you, would pull the trigger? They've already done it through their proxies and Hamas and Hezbollah and things before and around the world, and now they're calling to the carpet. Now, the interesting thing with this is, okay, President Trump, the initial attack took out 40 leaders, the supreme leader and 39 other leaders. How did they know that? There's reports coming out that Mossad had somebody within the internal circles of the supreme leader, have had them for years, and they decided to have a meeting in person, and they took them out just like they took out the Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon. And that's how Israel and the United States knew how to do it. There's reports that they took out the supreme leader's personal residence and other key leaders' personal residence, and they could be considered military assets, which is why the U.S. went after them in such a manner. And so all this is playing out here. Now, I want to bring this all together of what this means moving forward for us as believers, for us as Americans, for us as we continue to see, I'll pull this up, that attacks are continuing to go on. Of Israel is continuing to attack, and even U.S. in Tehran and Beirut, because Hezbollah has decided to get involved in Beirut. Donald Trump is continuing to take out military assets to provide the Iranian Persian people an opportunity to gain back their freedom and let it be them, just like in Venezuela. You take out, you cut off the head, and you got to let the people go in and fight for their freedom themselves. Because I think one of the biggest lessons you could learn from Iraq and Afghanistan is these could become forever wars if you get involved and you put troops on the ground. And I think Americans, rightfully so, don't necessarily want to do that. And so that's kind of been the key caveat, especially within the MAGA movement of, hey, if you're going to do this, don't put troops on the ground. And the belief before the original attack on Iran last year was the fact that, oh, you can't do this without putting troops on the ground. What President Trump's showing, look, no, you can do that without putting troops on the ground, even though he is putting troops in the region with ships. The question is, do they stay there, et cetera, things like that. But for us as believers, and I know Dutch put out something this morning on his Daily 15, which I think is very key, is we now have to recognize that obviously the Iranians and those who might have waited a little longer to do something might be antagonized and might be to the position of saying, all right, you do that, we're going to do this. And I think the American mind and the Western mind can say, okay, we did this, we're good, we can sit back on our laurels and we're comfortable. But I think the biggest lesson from Iraq and Afghanistan was the fact that you can't do that. That these people are willing, the enemies of freedom, we'll just say that, they're willing to wait. They were willing to get things to a point to where they can be strong enough to attack, even if it meant later in their life or not in their life. They're not just looking at this in the short-term complex. And I think that's one thing Americans have to understand. Obviously, Trump is doing this in the short term because it's his last go-around. He's not going to be president again. I know he's made jokes about Trump 2028, sending hats to Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom just does not like it. And then when President Trump meets with Democratic leaders, he brings out the Trump 2028 just to antagonize them and mess with them. But the reality is I think Trump understands, look, this is his last go-around, and now he got to start looking towards a successor. And you're seeing the polls, JD Vance Rubio go back and forth, and we're seeing things, Rubio does something great. Trump tries to put up Vance because Vance was in the lead, and then since Venezuela, Rubio's kind of been in the lead. But we'll see. I think that's a test of time. That's something we have to look at. But now is, somebody put it, yep, I agree, the wars never end. But the reality is, look, Scripture talks about there are wars and rumors of wars. There's gonna be those, and the thought now is, oh, the end times is coming, the apocalypse, everything's coming. Okay, even if it does happen, it's like, look, we still, I think one of the best quotes I've ever heard was from Rick Joyner. Is like, look, we pray as if he comes tomorrow and then return, but we live as if he doesn't come for another 1,000 years. Because if we don't understand the long-term effects, is look, the Iranian people, they still need to be reached for the gospel. The people in the surrounding regions in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, all these countries that are there, Israel itself, Jordan, Egypt, they need the gospel spread to them. And then you go to Pakistan, China, et cetera, places there as well. There's still a lot of work for us to do there in taking the gospel to the nations, to the utter ends of the earth, that I think we have to remind ourselves. But now the heightened sense of those who want to prevent the gospel from being spread will continue to rise. And that's what President Trump is very key on, is making sure people have an opportunity of freedom. In Venezuela, now you're looking into Mexico, as in you saw last month, looking in Greenland, and the decision of why he thinks Greenland is so strategic, and getting to the point of saying enough's enough in Iran, trying to end all these wars that have been and disputes that have been going on under Biden, putting an end to that, upwards of 7 peace deals he's made as president. You have to commend him for that. And the reality is look, now with this Iran thing, what do the proxies do? Because you could say, okay, they may not do anything or they may attack. Well, now, you cut off the head. What happens to a snake? The body flares. Without a leader and a decision point, as you see what happened in Gaza, is how do they go about continuing to fight the fight that they've signed up for? And the reality is this is where we need to pray for our leaders, for our troops and their families who are involved in this. Because I know I have friends personally who are affected by these decisions that are coming down. And their lives could be forever altered in this decision. And so the stress, the weight that this puts on them, but I mean, you got to commend them for they've signed up for this. They wanted this. They have said, look, we're willing to protect the interest of the Americans and of our family and our friends. And now they're being asked to rise to the occasion and do that. And you got to commend those who are right now, currently putting their lives on the line to take out an enemy that our leaders, and we would somewhat agree with them that if they were allowed to have certain weapons, would do something with it. And so you got to honor them for that. The warriors that are there, and this is also as a father of 3 young ones, is we've had this prophetic word here in the house for quite a while, is that this next generation of babies would be war babies. And I bring this up because it hits on the point of the lessons we can learn and take from the Bush era presidency and the Bush era Republicans of, okay, we got our man in office. Because I saw this as a young kid growing up, is, okay, we got our man in office, a believer, quote unquote, somebody who we can trust. We don't necessarily have to stay on the wall and watch. And look, the previous generation has repented for that. I honor them for that. But it's also a lesson now as an adult, as someone who is offering my advice and offering my opinion and being asked of my opinion, is, look, just because President Trump's in office and we might quote unquote agree with some of the things he stands for, is, look, he's a man. He's not Jesus. You know, the quote is, we talk about, people say he needs to be perfect. He needs to be this, that, and the others. 1, President Trump's not a pastor, but then 2, I like to add, is he's not Jesus. So we can't expect him to be perfect. Is we have to realize we need to continue to pray for him. But then also, hopefully, the people who are in his administration now can learn from this, can see how to make these decisions moving forward. Because if you look at the fallout of Reagan, of after him, Bush, he was the anointed one. Bush Sr., the anointed one, and put into office, and we see the fallout of that and the destruction of that, of then allowing Clinton back in office, and et cetera. We can go down that road, but I don't want to. But my point is this, is we can't get off the wall. We have to stay on the wall. We're making that momentum, and not the sense that we have to be the ones to do it, but we put our hope and our trust in the Lord. Let him be the one to seek vengeance. And me and my wife are recently watching the Netflix series, The House of David. And at the end of it, if you haven't seen it, spoiler alert, is David takes out Goliath. But through it, they did a very fantastic job of explaining this, of the pushback David would have got as he went out, and really his whole life, because he was not birthed out of a covenant marriage, to say the least. He was birthed out of an affair, if you would call it. His friends, his family knew it. And so he was treated as such. That's why he was put out to the field. But God took that heart, taken the lowest of the low, and honored him for that, and honored his heart and his relationship as he seeked him. And throughout the series, you know, when Goliath comes out, he defies God. And when you go back and read 2 Samuel 17, where it talks, or 1 Samuel 17, where it talks about that, my boys are fascinated with this. Is same in the scriptures, it talks about Goliath defied, and I think they did a great job of that. But then David, he had faith. And when he was going forward, one of his brothers, his oldest brother, asked him, he's like, "Aren't you afraid?" And he said, "Oh, I am. I am deathly afraid. Like I have a lot of fear, but I have more fear and hope, and that of our Father, and of our Lord. And as we see Jesus die on the cross, is how much more should we have faith in our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ to walk us through these battles, no matter what comes our way? Is understanding, okay, the Lord is using President Trump, and it's amazing. Is the Lord used the Persian people before? And now the Lord is using President Trump to help the Persian people, in this instance of the Iranian people there, and wanting to allow freedom to come forth. And hopefully in this is the prayer mainly for those in the region of Iran, and even the Iranians and Persians here in America, to go back and spread the gospel of the kingdom to them, as they're having encounters with Jesus, as they're being, quote unquote, awakened to the realities of what Islam is in a theocratic monopoly from a governmental standpoint of view, And the challenge is this, is I've seen this from former Muslims, is they can go one of two ways. And a lot of times they first go to atheism and agnosticism because they want nothing to do with any form of religion. But as they continue to seek and they continue to hunger, and this is what we want to pray for, their continual hunger of, okay, yes, this was a perverted view of, if you want to call it religion, but then it's like, we want to pray that they continue to search. Don't give up. Don't give up. Continue to search, of seeking the truth, of seeking the answers that their heart is asking for, and eventually knowing and trusting the Lord that as they continue to search, they'll find Jesus. And a lot of them are finding. I posted it on my story yesterday, if you follow me, of a gentleman who is Iranian, who was ended up being beaten because he was in a car with somebody who had alcohol in Sharia law. You're not allowed to have alcohol. Have it. He was 16 at the time, and he ended up getting beaten, but he ended up started to then question a lot of things throughout his faith, and his family told him, no, it's good, and this needs to happen, etc., things like that. But he said, you don't treat me that way if I was innocent. You don't beat me to a pulp just because I was in a car where somebody made the decision without me to have alcohol in the car. And he ended up having an encounter, having a dream where Jesus came and presented himself to him. And this is happening all across the Middle East that we're seeing. And so we want to continue to pray for the Iranian and Iraqi people and Afghani people and Pakistani people to have these encounters with Jesus, to be able to have the gospel spread to them, but then have not just freedom and for freedom's sake, but more so for their salvation and their eternal being, their eternal well-being. This is what we want to focus on. And so we want to continue to pray for. And I know I was kind of taking in the mass amount of news that happened over the weekend, and I just highlighting major things. But the key thing here we want to look at is President Trump and this administration. The decisions that they made is courageous in and of itself, but now the world is forever changed. People have been calling for this. We need to do this. We need to do this. Well, we're here. So now what is the fallout? Is you're seeing some on the far right who are extremely upset and think that President Trump made a disastrous decision. What does those type of thoughts that are starting to bubble up within the American culture mean come the midterms? Can the American people remember back to the State of the Union when President Trump asked a simple question is, who do you serve, the American people or these illegals? And some of these illegals possibly might be, if the reports are true, and we believe them to be true, that there are some leaders who would, and quote unquote terrorists who would align with the Iranian regime, would align with Hamas, would align with Hezbollah, who have gone out and had recent attacks. And so this is major groundbreaking decision from President Trump. You have to honor his courageousness to make this decision, but in reality is now's the time more than ever to not get caught up in the mighty power of the American military, even though it is very powerful, but it is to submit ourselves, surrender ourselves to the Lord. And Romans 12:1 and 2 talks about this, of making yourself a living sacrifice, surrendering to the will of the Lord in order to purify you. And so we're in that purification process if we allow ourselves to be. And Cindy Jacobs talks about this. She says, and it's true if you think about it, it's a living sacrifice. The biggest problem with that is the fact that it's a living sacrifice sitting there on the altar where the fire is being burned. And are we going to allow ourselves to go through that purification process, and it is painful as it may be, of letting the Lord consume the things that are not of him within our hearts, as David talks about, of searching after our own hearts, having ourselves have a mind after Christ, a mind after the Lord, have words that speak what he wants us to speak, have thoughts that are his thoughts. Let us hear what he hears, hear when he speaks to us. And Jeremiah talks about, I came to you once, I came to you twice, I came to you a dream and a vision of the night. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves somebody else may give us, we're a prophetic house, may give us a prophetic word, but where was the Lord coming in to give us these instructions, to give us guidance through these decisions? And so we had to honor President Trump and his administration, the military leaders who have made these decisions. But being that we are in a military community with Barksdale Air Force Base here, this affects people here. And so we're praying for our community. We're praying for our leaders who are here and dealing with this. But it's not something that we want to continue to think lightheartedly about. But we also have to understand this is a very significance of what this means moving forward for both the United States, Israel, and our allies, and even Europe as well. So Europe's going to have some major decisions to make as they have some challenges through open immigration that they're facing now. So hopefully this brings you guys peace with what has been happening, can give you guidance of not being fearful with this decision, but ultimately understanding like, look, the Lord is our protector. He is our provider. Matthew 6:26, 6:33 talks about if you seek ye first the kingdom of God, he will add, as it talks about the provisions there before us. And so we want to walk in that peace, potting soil of revelation, so that we can continue to hear the subtle, small, still voice of the Lord through this decision as we make our way forward. Because as we lead up to, and this is very significant, we lead up to the midterms, these decisions have an ever increasing effect, as we're seeing with Mandani winning the mayoral race in New York. We're seeing this community outside Dallas being forced and rushed upon. Now people are being critical of some of the decisions that have been voted through by Republicans in Texas to open the door for these decisions and these communities to be created. And so the point is Trump, Texas will never turn blue. I love Texans and I love their pride for Texas, but the reality is never say never, because when you do that, you now start to open a door for that. And unfortunately they have. And so this is the taking effect of little by little. The enemy understands that just as well as the Lord understands that. And the Lord's people need to start understanding that here in the days ahead. It's okay, we've gotten to this point where by little, our ground has been eroded, but little by little, we need to start taking it back. And we're here to pray through that. We're here to pray with you guys, wherever you guys are at. And hopefully this was informative for you guys. So let's remember to pray, continue to pray for President Trump in this moment, pray for our troops and their families, pray for the leadership in these decisions, because there are threats being made to be able to stay focused and follow proper procedures through this as well, if they can, because what he does now will have effects in the future for future presidents, as the quote I played from Nancy Pelosi of, look, these are the same things Obama did. So when they're crying war powers and he can't do this, he can't do that, your president, when he was in office, did the exact same thing. So hopefully that helps. And want to continue to thank you guys for following along with me as we go through this, as Pastor Tim and the team and Eric are in, a few other people are in Ireland on the Thin Places tour. Again, be sure, if you feel led to, please do give, as it helps support us, helps us continue to go on, continuing providing these broadcasts and these episodes and these prayer points as we lead closer and closer into the midterms. Because we couldn't do it without your help and your support. That's the only way we survive as a nonprofit. So blessings to each and every one of you for following along, staying in there as we go through all of this, through the news and through everything, and get to the point of continuing to be watchmen on the wall, praying for our leaders, praying for our president, and even those within his administration. So we'll be back next week. We'll be back tomorrow as well. With John, Lori, and Karen to continue to pray through the noon hour with some more situations as we see the fallout of this from what's happened this weekend. So blessings, and we'll see you guys tomorrow or next week. Have a good one.